I'm Sierra Vance and I'm 32 years old. The night of the acquisition gala was supposed to be the night my family celebrated becoming billionaires. Instead, it turned into the night my father looked me dead in the eye and erased 10 years of my life with one sentence. The ballroom was full of tech mogul, expensive champagne, and fake smiles. I waited until my father raised his glass for the toast, set my purse down, and stood up. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just watched him sign the papers that would seal his doom. Before I tell you what happened when the screens behind him turned on, tell me in the comments. Have you ever been the one doing all the work while someone else took all the credit? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. You're just the mechanic, Sierra. We don't need a mechanic where we're going. Hand over your key card. You're fired. My father looked me dead in the eye when he said it. We were sitting at the dinner table. He had just announced he was selling our company for $2.5 billion. He handed the credit and the money to my brother Brent, who barely knows how to turn on a computer. Then he looked at me and erased 10 years of my hard work in 10 seconds. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my key fob, and dropped it into my water glass. Goodbye, Dad, I said. I walked out of the house and got into my car. He thought he had one. He thought he owned the company, the code and me. But as I drove away, I wasn't sad. I was remembering a piece of paper tucked away in a dusty box in my closet. A paper that proved he didn't own a thing. Have you ever been the one paying for everything, but treated like nothing? Tell me in the comments. I drove my 10-year-old sedan down the winding roads of Mercer Island. The windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the rain. The interior of my car smelled like old coffee and exhaustion. It was a sharp contrast to the leather and mahogany scent of the dining room I had just left. But for the first time in a decade, the air felt breathable. As the estate disappeared in my rearview mirror, my mind drifted back to the beginning of the lost decade. 10 years ago, Vance Logistics wasn't a billion-dollar empire. It was a sinking ship. I remember the night I dropped out of my PhD program. It was 2014. I walked into my father's office and found him weeping at his desk. Not a few tears, he was sobbing. The bank was threatening foreclosure. The fleet was grounded. He looked up at me, eyes red, and said, "I'm going to lose everything. Sierra, the legacy is gone." I was 22. I loved him. So, I made a choice that defined the next 10 years of my life. I quit school. I moved into the server room. For 2 years, I didn't take a salary. I slept on a yoga mat under a rack of humming servers, using my hoodie as a pillow, rewriting the entire logistics kernel from scratch. I built the dynamic routing algorithm that eventually saved the company millions in fuel costs. I built the empire he just sold. And while I was coding until my eyes bled. Where was Brent? Brent was consulting. That was the family euphemism for gambling away company funds in Las Vegas. I remember processing the expense reports. $40,000 for a client dinner at a club. $12,000 for a corporate lease on a Porsche. I drove a Honda with a check engine light that I couldn't afford to fix while my brother drove a car that cost more than my annual rent. I brought it up to my mother once. Cynthia just sighed and adjusted her pearls. Brent is the face of the company. Sierra, he needs to project success. You're in the back end. It doesn't matter what you drive. That was the dynamic. I was the engine. Brent was the hood ornament. But the most crucial detail, the weapon I was now clutching in my mind like a knife, happened 6 months into my tenure. The company was starting to stabilize, but cash was still tight. Richard called me into his office. He wasn't crying that day. He was calculating. "Sierra," he said, sliding a document across the desk. "We need to talk about your employment status. Payroll taxes and health benefits are killing us. I need to move you off the W-2. He wanted to fire me as an employee and rehire me as an independent contractor. It saves the company about 20%, he explained, handing me a pen. It's just a formality. You're still family. He thought he was being a genius businessman. He thought he was exploiting me, stripping away my health insurance and my 401k to save a few pennies. He was so obsessed with cutting costs that he forgot to read the fine print of U.S. copyright law. Here is the thing about employees versus contractors. If an employee invents something, the company owns it. It's called work for hire. But if a contractor invents something and there is no specific assignment clause transferring ownership, the contractor owns it. All of it. I signed the paper that day, feeling small, unvalued, and discarded. I thought I was signing away my security. I didn't realize I was signing a deed to the entire kingdom. I pulled my car into the parking lot of my modest apartment complex. The rain had stopped. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence. Richard thought he had just fired his employee. He didn't realize he had just evicted the landlord. I wasn't the help. I was the owner, and the rent was 10 years past due. I unlocked the door to my apartment and stepped into the quiet. It was a one-bedroom walk-up, nothing like the sprawling estate I grew up in. But tonight, the silence felt different. It didn't feel lonely. It felt strategic. I gave myself exactly 5 minutes to mourn. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my damp work clothes, and let the weight of the last 10 years hit me. The missed birthdays because the server crashed. The Christmases spent troubleshooting firewall breaches while they opened gifts. The way Richard looked at me tonight like I was a broken appliance he was throwing out on the curb. I cried for the little girl who thought that if she just worked hard enough, Daddy would finally be proud. Then the 5 minutes were up. I wiped my face. The daughter was gone. The architect was clocking in. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled down a heavy cardboard box from the top shelf. I had labeled it in Sharpie. Tax Returns 2014. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady, guided by a cold mathematical precision. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the lid. The smell of old paper drifted out. I sifted through receipts and W-2 forms until my fingers brushed against a thick blue folder. The independent contractor agreement. I pulled it out. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges. I opened it to the back page. There it was. Richard's signature, bold and arrogant, right next to mine, small and cramped. He had signed this thinking he was saving a few thousand in payroll taxes. He thought he was being clever. I flipped to section 17B, reversion of rights. I read the words out loud to the empty room. In the event that the company does not exercise the option to purchase the exclusive rights to the developed intellectual property in perpetuity for the sum of $10 million within 10 years of this signing, all rights, ownership, and royalties shall revert automatically to the contractor. I looked at the date next to the signatures, April 12, 2014. I pulled out my phone and checked the date. April 15, 2024. They had missed the deadline by 3 days. I sat back against the wall, clutching the document to my chest. For a long time, I had wondered why I stayed. Why did I let them treat me like a servant in my own family? Why didn't I leave when Brent got the Porsche and I got a pat on the back? It's called the invisible chain. When you are the scapegoat, you aren't just mistreated. You are conditioned. You are trained to believe that your only value on this earth is your utility. You believe that if you just fix one more problem, if you just save them one more time, they will finally see you as a human being. It's a survival mechanism. You trade your dignity for a scrap of belonging. I looked at the signature again. That chain just snapped. Richard didn't see a partner when he looked at me. He saw a tool. And because he saw a tool, he forgot the most basic rule of business. You have to pay the vendor. He was so busy measuring the drapes for his Tuscan villa. So busy counting the billions he thought he had made that he forgot to check the expiration date on the foundation of his house. I wasn't just an employee he had fired. I wasn't just the help he had discarded. I was the landlord and his lease had just expired. I stood up and placed the document on my desk. I didn't need a lawyer to tell me what this meant. I needed to secure the rest of the evidence. The contract was the gun, but I needed the bullets. I opened my laptop. It was time to go hunting. The contract was the gun. But I still needed the ammunition. A piece of paper saying I owned the intellectual property was useless if I couldn't prove exactly what that property was. Richard would claim that the current system was a team effort. A derivative work built by expensive consultants to bury my contribution. He would lie. He always lied. So I needed the truth. And the truth lives in the logs. I didn't need access to the company's servers. Richard thought locking me out of the building locked me out of the system. But he forgot who built the house. I had maintained a mirrored repository on my private cloud for backup purposes since 2015. It was standard disaster recovery protocol, something I had begged him to fund, but he refused. So, I paid for the storage myself. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dark apartment. I pulled up the Git commit history for those who don't speak code. Imagine a diary that records every single sentence written in a book, exactly when it was written and who held the pen. You can't fake it. You can't erase it. I scrolled back 10 years. It was a wall of green text, a digital waterfall of labor. Every major update, every patch, every foundational algorithm was tagged with the same user ID. Sierra, admin, June 2016. Dynamic routing module. Author, Sierra, admin January 2018. Fuel efficiency logic. Author, Sierra, admin. March 2023. Autonomous fleet integration. Author, Sierra, admin. I filtered the search for Brent. The screen blinked. 0 code commits. 0 contributions. The only trace of my brother in the entire digital history of Vance Logistics was a series of access requests to the guest Wi-Fi network. I clicked on the metadata. While I was rewriting the kernel to save the company from bankruptcy in 2019, Brent was using the corporate bandwidth to download a 40 gigabytes update for a video game console in the executive lounge. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold, hard laugh bubble up in my chest. It wasn't funny, but it was absurd. My father was about to sell a company based entirely on my brain, claiming it was his son's legacy, and the only thing his son had ever contributed was lag on the guest network. I hit print. The sound of the printer rhythmically spitting out pages was the most satisfying thing I had heard in years. Chug, chug, chug. Each page was a nail in the coffin. I compiled the stack, the 2014 contractor agreement on top. The commit logs underneath. I bound them in a simple black folder. It was time to get dressed. I didn't put on a dress. I wasn't going to a party. I was going to a demolition. I went to the back of my closet and pulled out the suit I had bought for the day I made CEO. A day that never came. It was charcoal gray, tailored to within an inch of its life, sharp enough to cut glass. I buttoned the blazer. I looked in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the mechanic. She wasn't the daughter who begged for scraps of affection. She was the architect. I picked up the black folder. It felt heavy, like a brick. Richard wanted a show. He wanted to parade his success in front of the world. Fine, I would give him a show. I would give him the most memorable night of his life. I walked out the door and into the cool Seattle night. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and black, reflecting the city lights like obsidian. It was a perfect night for an execution. The Seattle Convention Center was glowing like a radioactive diamond against the dark skyline. Inside, the Titan Tech Acquisition Gala was in full swing. It was the kind of event that makes you nauseous if you actually know where the money comes from. There were ice sculptures carved into the shape of semi-trucks. There were fountains flowing with vintage champagne. There were politicians, tech journalists, and investors all buzzing around the room like flies on a carcass. I stood outside the glass doors for a moment, adjusting the lapels of my charcoal suit. Inside, my family was holding court. I could see Richard near the center of the room, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a scotch, laughing at a joke that probably wasn't funny. He looked like a king. Cynthia was beside him, draped in a silver gown that cost more than my car, accepting compliments with a practiced false modesty. And then there was Brent. My brother was already drunk. He was cornering a reporter from TechCrunch near the bar, gesturing wildly with a full glass of wine. I could almost hear him bragging about his visionary leadership and how he steered the ship through the storm. He was celebrating a victory he hadn't earned. Spending money he hadn't made. Standing on a pedestal built by my sleepless nights. They looked safe. They looked untouchable. They thought I was at home crying into a pillow, defeated by their lawyers and their money. They were wrong. I walked toward the VIP entrance. The velvet rope was guarded by a team of private security hulking men in black suits with earpieces. A normal person would have been intimidated. A normal person would have needed an invite. But I wasn't a normal person. I was the person who ensured their paychecks cleared last month when the payroll system glitched. "Evening, Marcus," I said, stepping up to the lead guard. Marcus blinked, then his face softened into recognition. "Miss Vance, I didn't see your name on the list," the boss said. "The boss is confused." "Marcus," I said, my voice low and calm. "I'm here to fix a technical issue with the presentation. You know how Richard gets when the slides don't work." Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second. He looked at the ballroom, then back at me. He remembered who stayed late to help him reset his password. He remembered who treated him like a human being while my father treated him like furniture. He unhooked the velvet rope. "Go on ahead, Miss Vance. Good to see you." "You too, Marcus." I stepped inside. Cold air, expensive perfume, roasted lamb. I avoided my parents. Hugged the shadows and moved straight to the AV platform at the back, the control center for lights, sound, and the massive IMAX screens. The tech barely looked up until I entered the booth. He startled. "Restricted area," he said, reaching for his radio. I placed a $100 bill on the console right over the mute button. "I'm Sierra Vance. My father wants a last-minute change to the visuals." He hesitated. I slid a black USB beside the cache. "Just a tribute video." Cue at the moment he signs a shrug. The drive loaded. Receipts. MP4. I returned to the floor, stopping near a pillar as the ceremony began. Richard took the stage, glowing with confidence. The contract between him and Titan Tech worth $2.5 billion sat ready. He spoke about legacy and hard work. The irony burned. He lifted the pen. I walked down the aisle. Slow, deliberate, boots clicking, heads turned. Richard saw me. Fear flickered. He tried to discredit me, calling me unstable, signaling security. I stopped 10 feet from the stage and met his eyes. I nodded, confused, arrogant, certain he'd won. He signed. The deal closed, and with it, his fate. Because mergers carry warranties of ownership, and when those are false, the corporate veil is pierced. Fraud becomes personal. I signaled the booth. The screens went black, then exploded to life. Center. The 2014 Contractor Agreement IP reversion clause glowing red left. Git logs my authorship at 99.8%. Right. Notice of copyright infringement. Cease and desist. The room gasped. Elias Thorne stared at the screens, then at Richard. "What is this?" Richard broke. Phones rose. Wine shattered. Lawyers surged. Security grabbed him. "Not me. The deal is terminated," Thorne announced. "You sold stolen property." I watched my family unravel. I felt no joy, only balance. I walked out. 3 months later, Titan sued. The veil was pierced. Everything was seized. House, accounts, trust. When Vance Logistics collapsed, I bought the assets cheap. I had the code. I rebuilt it as Sierra Logic. Gave equity to the workers. Built it right now. I sit in my office overlooking the sound. Rain clearing. Sun breaking through. I didn't inherit my life.